This is BBC World News. I'm Samantha Simmons. Our top stories. Russia hits back against US sanctions, ordering 10 US diplomats to leave the country.
We will respond to this measure in a tit-for-tat manner. We will ask 10 US diplomats in Russia to leave the country.
Human rights groups have condemned jail sentences handed to some of Hong Kong's leading pro-democracy figures, including the media tycoon Jimmy Lai.
Please stop! Stop!
Police in Chicago released film of the moment an officer shot dead a 13-year-old boy with his hands in the air. Final preparations for the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh, a very personal ceremony planned by the Duke himself. Hello and a very warm welcome to BBC World News. Russia has ordered the US ambassador to Moscow, John Sullivan, to return home for consultations amid a diplomatic spat with Washington. Moscow has also announced the expulsion of 10 US diplomats in a response to sanctions imposed by the US on Thursday. The Kremlin spokesman denounced what he called Washington's addictions to sanctions, but said President Putin wanted to avoid escalation. We can speak now to Sir Tony Brenton, who was the British ambassador to Russia from 2004 to 2008. He joins us now live, as you can see. Welcome to you. Thanks very much for being with us. What's your assessment then of the state of relations between the US and Russia?
Well, there's obviously lots of sound and fury going on at the moment, but both sides are to some extent being quite careful. The Americans will already have factored in that the Russians were going to throw out 10 of their diplomats in response to the expulsions a couple of days ago. And it's not clear what more the Russians are going to do, although they have asked the US ambassador also to leave, which raises the temperature. All of this is taking place against a background of Biden, prior to the announcement of the sanctions, having suggested a summit later in the year. And even today, after the announcement of the sanctions, the Russians were still looking genuinely at that. So there is a way out of this, in the sense that if the summit takes place, then there's a thing for people to aim at where they can begin to get tensions down. But I have to say, this is as noisy and as destructive as I have ever seen it.
And given that, how serious a situation is it?
Well, there are serious aspects to it. I mean, there are 80,000 Russian troops on the borders of Ukraine at the moment. And the temptation, if things do really slide out of control, will be for Russia to organize some sort of demonstration in relation to Ukraine, which could turn things very nasty very quickly. On the American side, OK, the Russians, the expulsions are anticipated. But if the Russians go beyond that and therefore force Biden to take further steps himself, step up the sanctions again, for example, then you're back on the downward slide. This has been the story of US-Russian relations for the last 7 years. Russian provocations, US sanctions, more Russian provocations, more US sanctions. The question is whether Biden can reverse that slide.
And do sanctions actually work?
No, they don't. No, they've never worked against Russia. There have been 20 or so sanctions actions of one sort or another by the United States against Russia in the last 7 years. Russia's policy has not been changed by one jot. I don't believe the Americans expect this latest package to affect Russian policy. The main point of it is to respond to a Congress which is very angry with Russia, probably to conceal to some extent US embarrassment at their announced withdrawal from Afghanistan. And the hope, I suspect, was to get Russia off the US agenda so Biden could focus on things which, in a sense, matter a great deal more to him, i.e. China and his domestic agenda.
A lot of heat at the moment, but the Kremlin haven't ruled out a possible summit with Joe Biden. Do you think that could be on the cards in the not too distant future? And if so, what would be on the agenda?
Well, I mean, this is actually the key test. If the two sides can restrain themselves enough to keep the possibility of that summit alive, then there's lots that they can do. They've got an ongoing negotiation on strategic nuclear weapons control. They're working together to revive the Iran denuclearization agreement. They're both important players on global climate change. There's a whole bunch of business, and the mere fact of sitting down and beginning to do that sort of business again then creates opportunities to lower the temperature in other ways.
OK, so Anthony Brenton, thank you very much for being with us here on BBC World News. Today's diplomatic tit-for-tat come as the leaders of Ukraine, France and Germany have held talks following the recent build-up of Russian military forces close to Ukraine's borders. The massive Russian build-up has led to escalating tensions in eastern Ukraine. Our correspondent Jonah Fisher sent this report from the Ukrainian trenches.
These trenches are the Ukrainian military's frontline positions in eastern Ukraine. Now, the Russian-backed forces are about 100 meters or so away from here. We could actually hear them a little bit earlier chopping wood to burn on their fires to keep warm. Now, this conflict line has been pretty quiet for the last few years. It's hardly moved on the ground, but the mood here has significantly shifted over the last few weeks, and the big reason for that is that Russia has deployed a large amount of both personnel and equipment on the Russian side of its border with Ukraine, and that has triggered fears, concerns here in Ukraine that this war, which has been pretty quiet for the last several years, may be about to enter a new phase, possibly even that Russia might be considering some sort of invasion. Russia, for its part, has played it all down, said it is perfectly entitled to move its troops where it wishes within its own country, and that its redeployment towards the Ukrainian border is part of a military exercise, and that there is nothing more sinister afoot. But the shift, both in terms of the troops and in terms of what's happening on the ground, has certainly got people here worried. And I think a lot of people are asking the question of what exactly is Russia up to? What exactly is it trying to achieve here?
Our correspondent Jonah Fisher there. A number of Hong Kong's most prominent pro-democracy activists have been handed jail sentences for organising and taking part in protest marches in 2019. They include the media tycoon Jimmy Lai, who will serve a total of 14 months in prison for participating in 2 unauthorised protests. This is the first time the 73-year-old has received a sentence for his activism, although he is already in prison awaiting trial on separate charges. Alongside Lai, Lee Choek Yan has also been sentenced to 14 months in prison, and 3 other activists will also be imprisoned. 4 defendants have been given suspended sentences, including the veteran activist Martin Lee. Well, today's sentences are being seen by many pro-democracy campaigners in Hong Kong, not as the end of a crackdown on their activities, but as a start. Our correspondent Danny Vincent spoke to Jimmy Lai in the run-up to his imprisonment.
Billionaire, activist and a staunch critic of Beijing, Jimmy Lai is also the owner of Hong Kong's last remaining opposition newspaper. He now faces prison in a trial that has come to symbolise China's tightening grip on the city. We've followed Jimmy Lai and his newspaper since he was first arrested 9 months ago, as his supporters gathered outside a police station awaiting his release. Since the introduction of the new law, Hong Kong has experienced dramatic changes. Outspoken critics, street protesters, and even journalists like me are under increased pressure.
I'm a journalist. Come here! Okay. Come here! I'm investigating you! Okay!
After his release on bail, we met Jimmy Lai in his mansion home.
Do you think about the contrast between this and the prospects of living
in prison? This is just living my life peacefully. But if I'm in jail, I'm living my life meaningfully.
You must fear some things for your family, for Hong Kong, for your loved ones.
Yes, I do have fear. You're right.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is a very nice day in Hong Kong today.
Despite the fear, Jimmy Lai continued his criticism of Beijing. Live streaming from his newspaper headquarters, he'd broadcast his talks with prominent Western political figures on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I think the freedom of speech is in danger here in Hong Kong.
Beijing says the new laws were needed to restore stability and end violent protest in the city. And the laws also make Jimmy Lai's broadcasts a risky move. Given their vague wording, it's unclear if the discussions could land him with even more charges. His every word spoken could be used against him. Before Jimmy is finally detained, we meet him one last time.
I'm prepared for the worst. If the worst comes, that means the most effective way that I can bring the world attention to Hong Kong.
Today, Jimmy Lai will begin serving jail time for an earlier crime, protesting against the government, and his trial under the new law begins. According to Beijing, the charges against him are equal to treason. They've compared the seriousness of his alleged crimes to murder. The fate of activists like Jimmy Lai will set a new precedent for Hong Kong. The space for dissent is shrinking. Danny Vincent, BBC News, Hong Kong.
Well, testimony inside the court was at times very moving, with lawmaker and activist Margaret Wong speaking eloquently about her reasons for protesting. She told the court there is no right so precious to the people of Hong Kong as the freedom of expression and the freedom of peaceful assembly. She continued, when the people, in the last resort, had to give collective expression to their anguish, I must be prepared to stand with them, stand by them and stand up for them. She then paraphrased 16th century British lawmaker Sir Thomas More by saying, I stand the law's good servant, but the people's first, for the law must serve the people, not the people the law. Baroness Helena Kennedy is a leading barrister and an expert in human rights, law, civil liberties and constitutional issues. She is also a personal friend to Margaret Wong.
My last contact with her was just a few days ago, in fact, while she was on remand waiting for sentencing. I have to be very careful in my emails to Margaret because she was in London just before COVID, actually, and she was mindful of the fact that the new legislation on national security would mean that careless exchanges with someone like me, who's a parliamentarian here in the United Kingdom, part of the legislature in the House of Lords, that she could be accused of being in conspiracy in league with foreign powers. And so we're very careful in our email exchanges, really just saying how fond we are of each other and how I send my warmest wishes to her, and I'm thinking about her and I want her to know that. But I can never really exchange in the way that I would want to because of what's happening now. Margaret, I've known for many, many years. She's a really fine lawyer. She's a barrister. And and academic, and she's absolutely passionate about democracy. She's a Catholic who it doesn't surprise me that she was quoting Thomas More. She is a truly principled, ethical person. The idea that she would be inciting anything other than peaceful, rightful demonstration against the encroachments on democracy is a nonsense. And so I was at least relieved that she was not immediately imprisoned. She's 73 now. But it is a shocker to see what's happening to Jimmy Lai. And of course, that's because he is a man who runs the media. He's a powerful voice in Hong Kong, and therefore they want to silence any media that is critical. And so, I mean, we're seeing really shocking things happening in Hong Kong. And Margaret's speech got a round of applause in the courtroom from my listening in on what's happening. But we've really got to make forceful representations to China that they really have to abide by the international agreement that they made when Britain, the United Kingdom, left Hong Kong. The agreement was that for 50 years they would allow the nourishment of democracy in Hong Kong and the two systems to continue to operate. And they just haven't abided by their agreement. Right. This is a breach of international law, and we're seeing affronts to the rule of law at every turn.
Baroness Helena Kennedy talking to me earlier. Now to Myanmar, where at least 36 protest leaders have been arrested in a series of raids. The crackdown by the military continues as opponents to the February coup announce the formation of what they're calling a national unity government. The 15-member body will include ousted members of Myanmar's parliament, pro-democracy figures and members of ethnic minorities. Announcing more details, activist Min Ko Naing appealed for the nation's support for the new body.
The government has the largest variety of ethnic minority groups, and it is the strongest in the history of our country. Support the government of national unity for the people's future. Support the national unity government for the future of our children. Only the people can decide. Only the people will delay the final battle. I believe we will win. The uprising must succeed.
Stay with us on BBC World News. Still to come, final preparations for the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh, a very personal ceremony planned by the Duke himself.
Pol Pot, one of the century's greatest mass murderers, is reported to have died of natural causes. He and the Khmer Rouge movement he led were responsible for the deaths of an estimated 1.7 million Cambodians.
There have been violent protests in Indonesia, where Playboy has gone on sale for the first time. Traditionalist Muslim leaders have expressed disgust. The magazine's offices have been attacked and its editorial staff have gone into hiding.
It was clear that Paula's only contest was with the clock. And as for a sporting legacy, Paula Radcliffe's competitors will be chasing her new world best time for years to come.
Quite quietly, but quicker and quicker, she seemed just to slide away under the surface and disappear.
This is BBC World News. The latest headlines. Russia says it will ask 10 US diplomats to leave Moscow and has advised the ambassador to return home for consultations. A number of prominent Hong Kong activists, including the media tycoon Jimmy Lai, are handed prison sentences for participating in anti-government protests in 2019. The mayor of Chicago has appealed for calm after the release of footage showing an unarmed 13-year-old boy being shot dead by a policeman last month. The video shows Adam Toledo with his hands up and with no weapon, although the police film shows a handgun near the spot where he fell. The teenager's death comes at a time of continuing high tension in the US about police killings. Barbara Platt-Usher reports from Chicago.
The policeman chases the boy down an alleyway. "Raise your hands," he shouts. Then a shot is fired.
Stop it! Stop it!
Police had said the boy, Adam Toledo, was carrying a gun. But the video shows him raising empty hands before he falls to the ground. 19 seconds from start to finish.
Shots fired! Shots fired! Get an ambulance up here now!
A distraught Officer Stillman calls for medical backup, but they can't save Adam. It seems he had dropped his weapon before turning round.
Those videos speak for themselves. Adam, during his last second of life, did not have a gun in his hand. The officer screamed at him, "Show me your hands." Adam complied, turned around. His hands were empty when he was shot in the chest at the hands of the officer.
Another shooting this week in Minneapolis triggered nights of protest against police. The killing of a young black man at a traffic stop has become one more flashpoint in a year of demonstrations for racial justice. And now they have also started shouting Adam Toledo's name here. The anger has added to tensions over the George Floyd murder trial, which is winding down.
No trespass! No peace!
The city is fortifying itself for possible violence after the verdict.
No racism!
Chicago has its own volatile history of police misconduct. City officials had demanded the release of the Bodycam footage after a public outcry.
Even as our understanding of this incident continues to evolve, this remains a complicated and nuanced story. And we all must proceed with deep empathy and calm. and importantly, peace.
A difficult time for the family and for the country.
Barbara Pletlasher in Chicago there. Well, police in the US city of Indianapolis have been giving more details about a shooting at a FedEx facility which left 8 people dead and several others injured. Officials say it appears the attacker acted alone and they have not yet established the motive. They have identified the attacker but not yet released their identity. President Joe Biden has ordered flags lowered to half-mast at the White House and all US government buildings in a sign of mourning after this shooting. In a statement, he's also urged Congress to act on gun safety measures. Similarly, the US Vice President Kamala Harris says there is no question this violence must end. Here's the latest on the police investigation.
You know, this suspect came to the facility, and when he came there, he got out of his car and pretty quickly started some random shooting outside the facility. There was no confrontation with anyone that was there. There was no disturbance. There was no argument. He just appeared to randomly start shooting, and that began in the parking lot, and then he did go into the building, into the facility for a brief period of time before he took his own life.
Let's get some of the day's other news now. The United Nations Refugee Agency says that as many as 65,000 people are fleeing from a city in northeastern Nigeria after a series of attacks by Islamist militants. Fighters claiming to be loyal to the self-styled Islamic State have conducted a series of hit-and-run attacks on Damasak in Borno province. At least 12 people were killed. The World Health Organization says that coronavirus cases globally are approaching the previous highest total on record. The number of new cases each week has nearly doubled since February, and the WHO says the rate of increase is worrying. Final preparations are being made for the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, which will take place at Windsor Castle tomorrow afternoon. The ceremony is reported to have been carefully planned by the Duke and will reflect his life and interests. Our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell reports.
Behind the castle walls, final rehearsals are underway. Across Windsor, extra police and wardens are on patrol as the town prepares for the funeral of one of its best-known residents. More than 700 service personnel have spent the last few days rehearsing precise movements in tribute to the Duke, who was mentioned in dispatches for his bravery and enterprise during the Second World War. Tomorrow afternoon, the Duke's coffin will be borne through the grounds of Windsor Castle on this, a Land Rover hearse, which the Duke helped to design, its dark green colour that of military vehicles. Following the Land Rover on foot will be members of the royal family. In the front, the Princess Royal and the Prince of Wales. Behind them, the Earl of Wessex and the Duke of York. And then Princes Harry and William. In an already much commented upon formation, rather than walking side by side, the two brothers will be separated, with the Princess Royal's son Peter Phillips walking between them. As here in 2002, at the funeral of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, military uniforms would usually be worn by members of the family entitled to do so. But tomorrow, all the royals will be in civilian dress. It is a neat way of avoiding controversy, which had been building around Prince Harry and Prince Andrew, with both having stepped back from royal duties and Harry no longer entitled to wear a military uniform. Inside the chapel, the service will be attended by just 30 people, in line with the coronavirus restrictions. All the Duke's children and grandchildren will be present, along with 3 of his German relatives. All, including the Queen, will wear masks. The blessing will be given by the Archbishop of Canterbury.
She's the Queen. She will behave with the extraordinary dignity and extraordinary courage that she always does. And at the same time, she is saying farewell to someone to whom she was married for 73 years.
It will be a difficult day for the Queen and her family. Prince Charles, yesterday visibly moved, has talked about how grateful they all are for the many tributes which have been paid to his father. Prince Philip was known around the world, but in Windsor there is a heightened sense of loss. He was the ranger in the Great Park for many years, and a dog walk would often include a brush with royalty. The message remains for the public to watch and listen to the funeral from home due to the pandemic, helping to facilitate the Duke's desire for a simple, no-fuss funeral.
Sarah Campbell there. Well, let's just show you the scene live in Windsor right now. You can see there people standing on ceremony outside the castle. Hundreds of bouquets have been moved from one of the castle gates to outside St George's Chapel, where the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral will take place tomorrow, as you were just hearing. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who will pronounce the blessing at the funeral service, said the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral will be a profound chance for the Queen to say farewell to her husband of 73 years. And we're talking to our correspondent live in Windsor in the next hour. Of course, we will have special coverage of the event starting at 11:30 GMT tomorrow, so do join us for full coverage of the funeral of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. That is it for me for now. You can reach me on Twitter. I'm at Samantha TV News. I'll be back a little later with more of the day's top stories.